Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. The federal government shutdown has had quite a ripple effect, so today we want to spend a few minutes looking at some of the resources available to ag producers who are trying to keep their operations moving forward in the meantime. Here's our Extension Ag economist Rodney Jones with some ideas.
FSA offices, like many other government functions, shut down in late December and haven't been able to reopen because they haven't come to an agreement. The FSA offices did reopen for some limited functions, but certainly not all functions at the FSA offices. This is obviously the time of year when most of our farm and ranch producers do their kind of financial planning, looking forward. Usually it's during this winter time period. We have a ton of resources to help producers work through the financial management and financial planning process in general, but more specifically for this issue, it's really a cash flow issue. And we have publications as well as spreadsheet tools to help producers with that cash flow planning process. And those are, of course, available on our through our Ag Econ Extension website. If they go to agecon.okstate.edu and click on Extension, it will quickly lead them to those what we're calling our e-farm management resources. That's probably going to be the most useful tool for this specific problem that we're dealing with, which really is a timing of cash flow issue. And that's what that tool is designed to help people work through. The longer it goes on, the more difficult it's going to be to just say, well, delay, wait and see, hold off paying that bill for another month. Those kinds of things, they're going to work in the short run, I think. For most of our producers, it's going to be more of a challenge, and we're just going to have to stay in constant communication with our input suppliers, with our other lenders, with our other creditors, and make sure that they're aware that, hey, one of the things that's going on here is we're just waiting on this Farm Service Agency services, payments, loans, whatever the case may be. Can we continue to get through and get through this system, but or this issue? But it's going to become increasingly difficult the longer it goes on, obviously, for that subset of producers that rely heavily on those sources.
We are talking about weaning weight trends across the U.S. with Dave Lalman, our Extension beef cattle specialist. And Dave, you and the team have some new research on the topic.
We do. We've worked with Kansas State University and Auburn University to look at those trends for the last about 25 years.
Talk about the data and kind of what you access to kind of begin putting together the picture.
Okay. So there's a lot of data available for seed stock operations through breed associations, but there's not that much information available for commercial cow-calf operations. And so with the help of Kansas State and Auburn, we worked with Superior Livestock Auction to look at their, we'll call it projected delivery weights on over almost 35,000 sale lots of calves, and we looked at the northern part of the country, and then we compared those trends to the southern part of the U.S.
And kind of it was kind of divided geographically. So let's break off that northern tier and what you discovered there.
So, and they were very different. So if we start in the north, which would be essentially Kansas North and then the Rocky Mountain Northwest, and we pulled all those sale lots together. And all of the sale lots that we analyzed were identified as non-weaned. And so the interesting thing is that weaning weights are going up fairly rapidly until about 2007 in the northern part of the country. And then they plateau, and they really have not changed since that time, so they've leveled off.
Has the research team started kind of analyzing why that plateau has happened and looked at that?
Well, we've had a lot of discussions about it. It'd be interesting to hear what others think, but you know, probably there's an environment by nutrition or genetic interaction, which means that perhaps the ranching environment, the forage resources may have about topped out in terms of the amount of weaning weight that these ranching enterprises can produce.
So let's talk now about kind of the southern portion of this study and where those states are in terms of these numbers.
Okay, and so same scenario, the same data set, superior livestock. In the south, we looked at about just a bit under about 8,000 sale lots from would have been Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, New Mexico. So the south central part of the country. And the interesting thing there over the last about 25 years is that the weaning weights have trended up very similar to the increase in weaning weights up until 2007 in the north at a very similar rate, but in the south they're still going up. The increase at current time is still about 3.8 pounds more projected delivery weight per year. So every year in the south, cow-calf producers think that their calves are going to weigh about another 4 pounds.
Why do you think it's important to study this in the first place, and then what are some of the takeaways moving forward, and what do you want to continue to look at?
So one takeaway would be to have good records so that each operation could evaluate whether or not, you know, that those weaning weights, which represent a major portion of a cow-calf operation's income if they sell a weaning, whether it's increasing or not. If it's not increasing, the obvious takeaway would be to focus more on reducing cost of production. And then the other opportunity would be to focus more on capturing value of genetic potential beyond weaning. So whether it be retained ownership or try to get more data on carcass quality and those kind of opportunities.
So adjusting management strategy, balancing out the bottom line, all the typical stuff.
All the typical stuff and capturing post-weaning value.
Exactly. Dave, great conversation. Congratulations to you and the team. It'll be published in the journals later this month?
The Journal of Applied Animal Science in January.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. In the meantime, you can read a summary on our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Last week on the Cow-Calf Corner, we visited with you about the length of stage 2 of calving. And as a reminder, we define stage 2 as when we first see the appearance of the water bag or the baby calf's feet, and stage 2 ends when the calf is completely delivered and on the ground. Today, let's visit about what happens if we allow stage 2 to go much longer than those averages. And what's really taking place in terms of the calf is that as that calf goes through the birth canal for an extended period of time, there's a situation that we call acidosis that is set up in that calf. And it's caused by the fact that the umbilical cord, as the calf is passed through the birth canal, is pinched off, especially during uterine contractions. So every time that umbilical cord is clamped off, then the calf is unable to get oxygen from the mother and to get rid of carbon dioxide going from the calf back to the mother. In that situation, over an extended period of time, then there's a buildup of carbon dioxide and its byproducts, primarily lactic acid, in the calf. And therefore, the calf's blood becomes lower in pH or acidotic, and there's where we get the term respiratory acidosis. If this becomes a lengthy process and this acidosis becomes very severe, then we can have the situation where it starts to compromise the health of the organs of that baby calf, including even the brain. What ranchers often call, a rather unflattering term, a dummy calf. Well, chances are what's happened is that during that very long stage 2 of calving, that calf's brain was deprived of oxygen long enough to cause some damage. So I think this really brings out the importance of why we talk about the length of stage 2 being about an hour for that first calf heifer, or a half an hour for the mature cow. And if they're not making real progress, then we get them up and look to see if we can provide assistance for those calves. Now, I really want to emphasize that if we have a calf that goes through a lengthy stage 2 and looks to be pretty sluggish, that one's really important for us to make sure that we get colostrum or a colostrum replacer in that calf as soon as possible. Now, the colostrum is important that we get it into any calf as early in life, because the intestine will not absorb those antibodies, those disease-protecting antibodies, for very long. And it's especially difficult for the calf that's been through that long stage 2 and has this acidosis problem in terms of absorbing the antibodies in the colostrum. So it's important that we get about 2 quarts of natural colostrum or a full dose of colostrum replacer into those baby calves as soon as possible after they're born, and that'll give them the best chance to fend off diseases as they go through the first weeks and months of life. Keep this in mind as you work through this calving season, and I think we'll save just a few more of these calves that'll bring us a nice price next year when we take them to town at weaning time. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
If you're a swine producer, or maybe you just have a backyard 4-H or FFA project, or maybe you're a large commercial producer, you may have read in the news recently about African swine fever. African swine fever is found in Africa, some parts of Eastern Europe, and some other areas, but recently it's been found in China, and it's continuing to spread across that country at a rapid pace. The virus is very difficult to destroy. It survives for long periods of time in the soil and in blood and in uncooked pork products. One of the most troubling aspects of this virus is that they've done some modeling and proved that it can survive in feed ingredients that travel from other countries into the United States. Most pigs would get this virus from even having close contact with other pigs or by ingesting it in some type of contaminated food. Animals that get infected with the virus, typically you're going to find animals that die very quickly. Those that survive are not going to want to eat. They'll have high fevers, lay around a lot. You tend to see some skin lesions, such as some red blotchy or blackened areas. Sows that are pregnant will abort. The other common clinical sign that you'll see is some type of bleeding episode, whether it be a nosebleed or have a bloody diarrhea. There is no treatment for this disease, and there's no vaccine to prevent it. So producers have to rely on following their biosecurity protocols to keep this disease out of their herd. Now, the chances that this disease winds up in the United States are pretty remote. We have protections in place to try to keep this virus out of our country, and so I would be very surprised to see it enter here. But that's no excuse for us not to be aware of the disease and not to be sure and practice our good biosecurity protocol. I think we all have to keep in mind that a few years ago, porcine epidemic diarrhea virus wasn't in this country either, and somehow it got to China, and a few years later it was found in the United States. So please be cautious about this disease and keep your herd protected. If you'd like to read a little bit more information about African swine fever, if you'll go to sunup.okstate.edu, we'll put some information there for you.
Taking soil samples is an extremely important part of production agriculture, gardening, and even home ownership. Collecting the soil sample is extremely important, though, to get a good number and understanding how to collect it right. Oklahoma State University recommends that we collect our soil samples from a depth of 0 to 6 inches deep. Often it's asked, why do we do that? Some consultants may collect samples 0 to 8 inches deep. Others may collect samples from 0 to 3. There's a couple reasons why it's really important to know the depth that you're collecting at. One is the lab. The lab is looking at samples in terms of concentration, and they relate that concentration back to amount of soil they expect it from. So if you send a sample to Oklahoma State University soil testing lab, they're expecting that you send a 0 to 6 inch sample. That 0 to 6 inch layer represents 2 million pounds of soil. The concentration of N, P, or K that they measure in that soil is directly related to the depth that they're assuming. If you collected 0 to 3 or 0 to 8, that makes the assumption wrong on how much nutrient is in that layer of soil because they don't have the right depth. In addition, depth is extremely important on our immobile nutrients, specifically phosphorus. Now, one of the reasons we choose a 0 to 6 inch depth is that this is the traditional depth of tillage. In this zone where we're tilling it up, we're mixing the soil and making everything homogeneous, and so we're taking a sample that goes down to this depth and pulling it out and representing that depth. That works great until we get into something like no-till or reduced tillage where our tillage depth is less. With phosphorus, we have these plants growing, we have everything growing up there, we have plants, we have roots down, roots are extracting phosphorus, they're bringing phosphorus up to the top, they're putting phosphorus in the leaves, our leaves decay, the phosphorus comes down on the surface. We're applying phosphorus fertilizer, so you have all this P on the surface, fertilizer on the surface. And what you do over time is see that the surface area, 0 to 2 or 0 to 3 inch depth, is high in phosphorus, and the 3 to 6 inch depth is lower in phosphorus, and the deeper 6 to 12 is extremely low in phosphorus. So the importance of sampling depth in this is if I take a depth from 0 to an 8 inch sample and I'm well below plow layer, I'm getting into some very low soil test phosphorus values, and I'm actually going to show much less phosphorus there. If I'm in no-till, I'm actually recommending that we look at this 0 to 3 inch zone. Our recent research at Oklahoma State University says that 0 to 3 inch phosphorus sample best shows what our phosphorus need is for wheat and sorghum. So with that, as we're out taking our soil samples, let's pay careful attention to our depth that we're collecting at, and make sure that if you sample at a depth other than 0 to 6, you let the testing lab know so they can give you the proper recommendations out of the backside. For more information on soil testing, check out the SUNUP website at www.sunup.okstate.edu.
Earlier in the show, we were talking about impacts of information from the government during the shutdown. Kim, are you seeing any of those impacts, and does it impact the world markets too?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now with lack of information is it's a good time of the year for that to happen. There's just not much going on in the wheat market. You know, Australia and Argentina just finished their harvest, so we've got some news from the market analyst on that. The WASDE didn't come out, but again, you had the market surveys by independent firms that gave us some information. So yeah, our information is limited, but I think it's enough to see what's going on in the market.
From what you're hearing, is there any big shakeups in the market right now? What's happening?
Well, there's really nothing going on, and a sign of that is if you look at, say, the price of wheat in Burlington, Oklahoma, since January the 3rd, it's been from $4.77 to $4.88, 11 cent move in wheat prices since January 3rd. That just tells you that there's just not much happening right now.
As an economist, you probably like that consistency, but as a wheat grower, they need that consistency to kind of rise in price. What's it going to take to get off that bubble?
So what we need to do is get some information or some export demand. If we can get some export demand, then we'll break out of this sideways price pattern. And in that increase in demand, I think our export demand is going to have to come from lack of supply of wheat in the Black Sea regions, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, running out of export wheat so that the demand can come into the United States.
So what are you hearing from that part of the world, the Black Sea region?
Well, there's quite a few reports that Ukraine, their ministry this last week, put out a request from their exporters to see how much they're planning on exporting, that they say that they're pretty much reaching their limit. The same with Russia. Look at the supply of wheat held by private owners is down 36% as compared to last year. So the wheat is being limited in that area, and they should run out, big question mark, run out of wheat to export, say about March.
So all of that's taking place in the northern hemisphere where a lot of the wheat is in the bins, but in the southern hemisphere, they're putting the wheat in the bins, wrapping up the crops. How did the crops in Argentina and Australia shake out?
Well, they came in as expected. You look at Australia, it came in about 625 million bushels compared to 783 last year, and a 5-year average of 914 million bushels. So Australia's crop short and probably not as in good a quality as it has been in the past. Argentina, on the other hand, a 700 million bushel crop, 680 last year, average of 534. So Argentina will probably make some of that lower amounts of wheat out of Australia.
So we move back to the northern hemisphere. You were talking about Ukraine and Russian wheat. If their numbers on the wheat start to deplete, will there be demand for U.S. wheat? And if so, how long before we see that?
Well, it appears, or you would think that there'd be demand for U.S. wheat when they run out of wheat, the hard red winter wheat in the Black Sea area. However, you've got India's harvest starting in March. You've got Pakistan's harvest starting in March. Both of those are looking relatively well. There's some speculation that they will come in and export wheat. Russian Ukraine wheat runs out in March. Ours should pick up, but then you've got India and Pakistan. There's a possibility that our export demand may not really pick up until we get very close to harvest, and then we see some price increases.
So you mentioned Pakistan and India possibly being exporters later in the year. Who's buying the wheat, and why are they buying those countries' wheat versus the U.S. wheat?
Well, you can look at one reason is transportation advantage. The largest market is Egypt, Algeria, North African countries right there is the largest wheat market. Then you can go over to Indonesia, you can go over to Eastern Asia, the Black Sea area, and include India and Pakistan in that area have a transportation advantage over Australia, over Argentina, over the U.S. You get over into the specific areas there, the Philippines, Japan, we have a little bit of transportation advantage, but the major wheat imports are in countries nearer to Russia and Ukraine than they are to the U.S.
Okay, thank you much, Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Hi, Wes Lee here with your weekly Mesonet weather report. Oklahomans experienced a couple of strong cold fronts this past week. The minimum air temperatures dropped into the 20s over the weekend, and it got even colder on Tuesday the 22nd when temperatures dropped into the teens in the upper northwest. Coupled with the cold air were some very strong north winds. On Tuesday, these wind gusts reached as high as 57 miles per hour at Boise City. When we take into account the winds and the temperatures together, we got wind chills into the single digits for most of the western half of the state. These conditions were brutal for people, but maybe even worse for livestock that doesn't have the ability to put on an extra layer or get in out of the cold. To help determine the effect of winter weather on livestock, the Oklahoma Mesonet has a product called the Cattle Comfort Index. It takes into consideration not only temperature and wind speed, as the human wind chill does, but includes solar radiation and relative humidity in the equation. If we look at the Cattle Comfort Index for Tuesday, we see numbers were as low as -2 from Cheyenne up through the Panhandle. This starts to put cattle into the cold danger category, our lowest wintertime rating. Next up is Gary with more wintertime weather information.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we've certainly been lucky with our moisture over the last 30 to 60 days. It completely eradicated the drought, as has been well publicized here on the Mesonet weather report, but we are getting a little bit dry again. I don't think it's anything to be concerned about just yet, but let's take a look at this Mesonet map just to see what I'm talking about. Now, this is the consecutive days with less than a quarter inch of rainfall map from the 120 Oklahoma Mesonet sites. We do see down in southeast Oklahoma, they've had some significant moisture just recently, but over the northwestern, probably 2/3 of the state, we see going on about 11, 12 days without at least a quarter inch of rainfall. It varies a little bit here and there, but there are other places, of course, down in southwest Oklahoma and in the Panhandle where that's reaching up to nearly a month. But again, I don't think that's anything to worry about just yet. One of the concerning things is we have been a little bit above average with temperatures as we've begun the new year. As we can see from this departure from long-term average Mesonet temperature map, this is based on the statewide average. And this is the minimum temperature, so the low temperatures, we have been around 3 to as much as 7 degrees above normal as we've started the new year. We have gotten a little bit lower, closer to normal as we've gone through the rest of the month, but it's still, we have been above normal in temperatures, especially that minimum temperature as we started the new year. However, it is January and it still does get cold. As we see from this Mesonet map, this is the hours below freezing from January 1st through January 23rd. We still have above 200 hours below freezing in the Panhandle as expected, in the 100 to 150 to 175 hour range as we go over much of the rest of the state, and of course down along the Red River and in southeast Oklahoma, not quite as much there, but still we do get cold in January, and it has been below freezing for a significant amount of time as expected. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.